Not a long time ago, I used to cry at night. And it wasn't because something terrible had happened. It was because I was convinced that I was falling behind. I was 16. I grew up in Ukraine, and there, underneath everything, the family dinners, the casual conversations, even the way people look at you when you tell them your age, there is this current running. It's quiet, but constant. By 22, you should already have your master's degree. You should be stable, certain, essentially done. I remember a call with a relative, normal conversation, and then, almost as a joke, well, in Ukraine by 22, you already have your master's, and you'll be having yours in your 40s, right? They laughed. I laughed too. And then we moved on. But that sentence did not really move on with me. I was 14 when I left Ukraine. One decision, and suddenly, I was somewhere completely else. I arrived knowing no one and speaking nothing. Not the local language, not French, not English, nothing. I lived with guardians, kind and responsible people. Every evening, we'd sit at the dinner table, them, me, the other kids. They talked and they laughed and they passed things around. And I sat there and ate, nodding at the things I didn't understand and smiling at the moments that might have been funny. One evening, someone turned to me and asked me something. I could tell it was a question because of the way their voice went up at the end. And I just smiled and nodded because I had no idea what they had asked. Every evening, I watched mouses move and heard sounds. But the meaning just did not arrive. Every couple of days, I called my mom. And almost every time I cried. Those calls were the only moments that felt real. The only moments I was understood without having to perform or without having to explain. But then, the call would end, and I'd be back in the room, four walls. Before I moved to a regular school, I was in a school for immigrant students. And honestly, that part wasn't the hard, because everyone around me was Ukrainian. We were all lost in the same way, which somehow made it feel like we weren't lost at all. But then, I moved to a regular school. On the first day, I walked into the classroom, 15 years old and brand new to everything. And I stopped. Everyone looked so young. I genuinely thought we were in the wrong room. The age gap, it wasn't huge on paper, but the way they spoke and the way they moved through that space, it felt like a different world. Understanding the language and being able to say exactly what you mean in it, those are two completely different things. I was in a sea of conversations I could follow, but not quite enter. I didn't have a word for what I was feeling then. But something quiet started building inside me. Not panic, not even sadness. Just a slow, steady feeling that I was behind. So I studied. Not because anyone told me to. I studied because it was the one place where I could prove myself that I still matter, where effort turns into something visible. And all the studying paid off. I remember where I was when I found out. Sitting on my bed, the same bed, in the same four walls. Reading an email. You will be moving up 1 year. I am allowed to skip a whole year of school. And the strange thing was, I didn't cry. I didn't jump up. I didn't do anything. I just sat there for a minute, holding the phone and waiting to feel something. Then I texted my friend. She was the person who made me feel like trying wasn't crazy. And when it worked, her happiness was the kind that only comes from someone who actually knows what something costs you. Other people heard about it too. What? How? Well, that's amazing. And I remember reading those messages and feeling something strange. Not pride, more like confusion. Because to me, it didn't feel like an achievement. It felt like fixing a mistake, closing a gap, and getting back to zero. And I want to be honest with you. I still do this. And I don't think I'm the only one. Not so long ago, I was with friends. And someone mentioned the person we knew. Same age as us, and graduating this year. And I felt it. That familiar drop. Same age, already there. But before I move on, this TED Talk is not me telling you all this because I figured it out. But something has shifted. Not all at once, not in one big moment of clarity. Just slowly. And each time the feeling comes, it's a little lighter. And I think I know why. For a long time, the question I kept asking was, why am I behind? But that question hides an assumption that there is only one correct timeline, a version of a life everyone is supposed to follow. So I started asking a different question. Behind which version of the story? Because I was measuring myself against a life I never actually lived. A life where I never left Ukraine, where everything stayed familiar, where my mom was down the hall, not on the screen every 2 days in 15 minutes windows. That life, someone else's life, was the standard I had decided I was failing. But that comparison was never real. Here's what I've noticed. We compare outcomes without comparing starting points. We see where someone is and think, why couldn't I do that? Without ever asking, did we start from the same place? Most of us are just measuring ourselves against a life we never actually lived, and forgetting to count the one we did. I never really counted the year I rebuilt something from nothing, the language I had to learn because I had no other choice, the dinner tables where I sat in silence and showed up anyway, the phone calls where I fell apart and still got up the next morning, and the versions of myself I had to let go of so that something new could exist. That's the life I had. And now, I count all of it. And counting it doesn't make the hard part smaller. It just makes me bigger than the gap. But I want to be careful here. I'm on my own timeline can mean real peace. But it could also mean fear, but dressed up nicer. A way of avoiding a question instead of giving an answer to it. I don't always know which one I'm living, but maybe that uncertainty is a part of it too. People who seem on time, they didn't get more hours. They just didn't have to spend theirs building the ground beneath their feet first. And I was building. And I realize now that what I built can't really be compared, because nothing else was built under the same conditions, with the same losses, and in the same silence. Which means there is no timeline I'm laid against. It's only the timeline I made from what I was given and in the time that was actually mine. Turns out that the life I was failing at was never mine to live. Thank you.